Dear chosen ones, this was never random. You didn't just happen to be in the right place at the right time. There was no accident, no coincidence, no lucky alignment of events. What brought you into that moment, the one you still can't fully explain, was something sacred, something orchestrated, a divine pull that came not through thunder, but through the quiet depths of your spirit. You felt it like a weightless gravity, a silent tug, leading you straight to someone who was breaking quietly, a soul on the edge, a light almost gone, and while others passed them by, distracted, dismissive or unaware, you stopped. You saw what wasn't visible. You heard what wasn't spoken. They didn't scream, they didn't beg, but heaven did. And in response, God sent you. You didn't arrive with a plan. You didn't need a sign in the sky. You just knew. Somewhere deep inside, even without understanding, you felt it. This is why I'm here. Not to fix, not to be praised, but to be present. To carry something eternal into a moment that looked ordinary on the outside but was holy at its core. So before we begin, let me take a moment to say this from my heart. Thank you to each of you who has stood beside this message, not only with your attention, but with your generosity. If you've given through the super thanks, I want you to know how deeply your offering matters. You're not just supporting content, you're sowing into the frequency of awakening. But whether you give or not, you are just as appreciated. Your presence alone is a gift. Your listening heart is fuel for this mission. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being you. Now I invite you to comment 99 below. Not as a routine response, but as a spiritual signal, a declaration, a confirmation, that you recognize this moment is not entertainment, it is activation. And if something just lit up in your chest, that strange burning sense that this message is calling your name, it's because it is. Like this video if you agree. Subscribe if you know your journey isn't over. Because what's coming next has already been written in heaven's scroll, and you are part of it. You didn't stumble into this message. You were summoned. You are the quiet answer to someone else's silent prayer. And this story you're about to hear, it isn't just a story, it's a memory your spirit has been waiting to wake up to. So settle in, chosen one. The time has come to remember why you were sent. God's chosen ones. You were chosen to help a fallen angel, without making a sound. They weren't just a friend passing through. They weren't merely a stranger you happened to meet by chance, a romantic entanglement, or someone tied to a moment in your journey. No, this soul was placed on your path by a divine hand with such precision that not even the most intricate human planning could have orchestrated it. You didn't stumble upon them. You didn't happen to cross paths. Chosen one, your soul was sent, assigned on a mission you didn't consciously sign up for, but that your spirit recognized instantly. Have you ever asked yourself why certain people enter your life and shake your core without explanation? Why your heart felt drawn to their pain even when they never spoke a word of it? That's because they weren't just broken, they were sacred, a fallen angel in disguise. Their fall wasn't public, but the weight of it echoed in the spirit realm. And you, yes, you were chosen as the one who would help lift them, not with your hands but with your presence, not with fanfare but with divine stillness. You were not sent to be seen, you were sent to see. Even now, you can remember the first moment your soul recognized them. There was no angel with a flaming sword announcing their identity. No scripture descended from the sky, but something stirred in your gut, something ancient, something holy. It wasn't pity you felt, it was knowing. While others looked at them and saw confidence, charm, maybe even arrogance, you saw something else, the flicker behind their eyes, the fatigue behind their laughter. You sensed their silence carried stories they'd never tell aloud, stories only heaven knew. And yet you heard the echoes of those stories in your spirit. How is it possible to hear someone who says nothing? Because chosen ones are not guided by the five senses. You operate on frequencies others can't perceive. Their soul called out in spiritual Morse code, and you were the only one tuned in. This wasn't about being nice. It wasn't about charity or codependency or emotional saviorism. It was alignment, a pre-birth covenant sealed in the breath of God Himself. Long before you opened your eyes in this world, your spirit had already agreed, when they fall, I will find them. That's why you couldn't look away even when it hurt. That's why, even when your mind screamed for peace, your heart remained anchored. You didn't stay because you were weak. You stayed because you were sent. Have you ever wondered why letting go didn't feel like freedom, but like betrayal? Because the bond wasn't built on emotion, it was built on mission. They didn't ask for rescue. They didn't wear their suffering like a badge. But heaven saw, and heaven responded. Through you. Psalm 34:18 tells us, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and saves those who are crushed in spirit." But sometimes the way he draws near is through you, chosen one. Through your patience, your discernment, your quiet strength. You didn't heal them with words. You healed them by standing still when everyone else walked away. You became a lighthouse without flashing lights, a sacred shadow offering sanctuary to a soul that was slipping. What if God didn't send you to fix them, but to remind them they were never abandoned? What if your assignment was not to speak truth, but to embody it? Consider the story of Harriet Tubman, called Moses by many, who was more than just a conductor of the Underground Railroad. She moved in silence, guided by visions and spiritual intuition. Her mission wasn't shouted from rooftops. It was whispered in the night. Each time she returned to rescue another soul, she was obeying a divine assignment others couldn't see or understand. So too, chosen one, did you move in obedience that made no sense to those around you? You saw them falling, but not as a threat. You saw them falling, but not as a burden. You saw them and remembered the call you didn't even know you answered. 2 Corinthians 1:4 says, "He comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." Your past pain wasn't wasted. It trained your eyes to see what others overlook. It refined your heart to hold what others drop. You were shaped in your own wilderness to carry the wounded without collapsing. And that strength, that quiet divine resilience, is what wrapped around them like armor, even when you said nothing at all. Can you feel now how nothing in your past was random? Every scar, every sleepless night, every tear baptized you in readiness for this one soul. Look at the story of Robin Williams, a man who made the world laugh but carried deep, invisible grief. Many were around him, but how many could truly see him? How many chosen ones missed the cue because the silence looked too happy to question? That's why God raises people like you, those who can see the soul through the smile. You don't require confession. You discern intention. You don't wait for breakdowns to show up. You feel the tremor before the quake. Another story is that of Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, whose entire ministry was presence. He didn't perform. He didn't entertain. He simply showed up in quiet consistency. He spoke to the child within every soul, just like you've been doing, just like your spirit has been whispering to the fallen one near you. You are not alone. You are not discarded. You are seen. Isaiah 61:1 affirms this calling. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. Not everyone is sent to the masses. Some are sent for just one. And that one matters so much to heaven that your entire path was redirected to intersect theirs. Your obedience wasn't public, but it was holy. And though the world may never celebrate you, the angels already have. You may never get recognition. You may never hear thank you. But chosen one, the heavens took note of every moment you stayed when it hurt. Every time you held space for a spirit too heavy to lift itself. Every silent prayer you uttered. Every spiritual battle you fought on their behalf, even when they didn't know it. Why do you think your love stretched so far? Because it was never human, it was divine. The fourth story is that of Anthony Ray Hinton, a man wrongfully imprisoned for 30 years. His quiet strength, his refusal to grow bitter, and his deep spiritual compassion eventually helped free not only himself but inspired others with his unwavering hope. That's you too. You've been placed beside someone imprisoned by guilt, pain, or spiritual amnesia, and your role wasn't to tear down the bars but to remind them they still had wings. John 1:5 reminds us, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." You didn't come to fight their darkness. You came to be the light that made it impossible to ignore. You didn't force change. You awakened memory, the memory that they were once divine, once chosen, once whole, and still can be. You didn't fix them, because fixing was never the goal. Chosen one, your assignment wasn't repair, it was remembrance. You didn't come into their life to change who they were. You came to remind them of who they had always been beneath the weight of pain, betrayal, and spiritual amnesia. While others demanded performance, you offered presence. While the world labeled their light as too much, you recognized it as sacred. You held space when no one else did. You didn't douse their fire. You shielded it with your own soul, even as your own flame flickered. Why were you the one to see beauty in their brokenness when others walked away? Why did your heart ache for them before your mind had time to understand what was happening? It's because your spirit remembered something your body had not yet recalled. This was more than a meeting, it was a divine moment of activation. You didn't arrive with solutions, yet you became their anchor, not by force but by spiritual gravity. In a world full of noise, your silence carried divine weight. That's what chosen ones do. You felt their fading light and responded not with panic but with calm certainty. Have you ever wondered why their face came to mind at random times? Why your heart felt pulled even when you barely knew them? It wasn't random, it was recognition. Something in you knew something in them beyond names, titles, or roles. You saw past the mask and into the essence, and in doing so, you didn't just save them, you began to awaken something ancient within yourself. The book of Luke 17:21 says, "The kingdom of God is within you." When you recognized the divine in them, it wasn't just compassion, it was the kingdom recognizing itself. The fallen angel didn't need your rescue, they needed your remembrance. And in remembering them, you remembered you. This was never a one-way mission, it was mutual ignition. One soul dimming under the weight of the world, the other carrying divine fire like a secret torch. And when your paths crossed, something sparked, not just for them but for you. Could it be that heaven used their silence to awaken your calling? Could their pain have been the compass pointing you to your own anointing? This moment wasn't just about a bond, it was about a blueprint. Because now you must ask, was that the only one, or have there been others? People you were drawn to for no logical reason, encounters that left a lingering spiritual echo. What if this wasn't your first divine rescue, but simply the first time you became conscious of it? What if every random connection that stirred your soul was part of a wider orchestration, a larger mission unfolding without your permission, but with your full participation? Are you beginning to see the pattern? Romans 8:28 reminds us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." You weren't just called to one assignment. You were born into a purpose that runs deep and wide, far beyond the understanding of most. Each soul you've ever felt mysteriously responsible for, it was never by chance. You've been operating as a soul guide, a light bearer, without even knowing it, and now the veil is lifting. Look at the life of Maya Angelou. She didn't just write poetry, she wrote deliverance. Her words didn't fix broken people, they reminded them they weren't broken to begin with. Her presence alone gave people permission to rise. Like you, she didn't need a pulpit. Her life was the sermon. Her existence was the healing frequency. That's what you carry too, a quiet liberation, a gentle thunder. Have you noticed that people confess their pain to you without knowing why? That strangers feel safe in your energy, even if they can't explain it. That's not emotional coincidence, that's spiritual assignment. There is something both humbling and terrifying about realizing your soul is on mission while your mind is still catching up. You're walking through a battlefield without armor, and yet you emerge untouched because your weapon isn't metal, it's memory. The memory of the divine in others, the memory of light buried under trauma. You don't need to do much because your presence alone realigns. You are the sanctuary in a collapsing world. Let's consider someone like Brandon Stanton, the creator of Humans of New York. He didn't change people, he didn't fix them, he simply made space for their story to matter. And in doing so, he reminded them they weren't invisible. That's what you did, that's what you keep doing, whether you realize it or not. So the question is, who's next? Who is already on their way to you, needing the light you carry without knowing how to ask for it? 1 Peter 4:10 teaches, "Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms." You've been a steward of unseen grace, not through sermons but through sacred stillness. You've shown others what it means to be held spiritually when the world lets them fall. You've walked into lives that looked fine from the outside, but your spirit knew they were suffocating on the inside. You didn't wait for a breakdown. You responded to the quiet fading. And that's the hallmark of a true chosen one. You respond before the collapse. You see what others ignore. You intervene in silence, just like Fred McFeely Rogers. Yes, Mr. Rogers again, who believed that being present, truly present, was enough to change a soul's course. He said, "You don't have to do anything sensational for people to love you. And you, beloved chosen one, didn't have to perform for heaven to trust you with someone else's sacred repair." Isaiah 58:10 says, "If you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness." You've been pouring from a well no one could see, sustaining souls others didn't notice were thirsty. And your reward, clarity, revelation, an unveiling of your deeper assignment. The hunger you've satisfied wasn't just physical or emotional, it was spiritual dehydration, and you brought water without demanding gratitude. One final story. Consider the quiet courage of Chadwick Boseman. As he battled cancer in silence, he still inspired millions with the roles he played, most of whom had no idea he was fighting. But what if someone close to him knew? What if one soul, discerning, quiet, spiritually awake, recognized the weariness behind his strength and simply stayed close? That's what you've done for the fallen ones in your path. You stayed close without needing answers. You held light without demanding acknowledgement. You were the miracle no one saw coming. So now, chosen one, what if every heartbreak, every intuitive pull, every soul you've ever felt too deeply for was never a coincidence but a code? A sacred activation meant to awaken not just them but you. Because this path you're on, it's not just for them, it's for your own rising. Every light you protect illuminates your own. And with every silent rescue, you're being shaped into the embodiment of divine remembrance itself. This fall wasn't loud. There was no explosion, no public collapse, no dramatic unraveling that would demand the world's attention. No, chosen one. This was a silent descent, so quiet that even those standing nearest to them couldn't hear it. But you did. Your spirit did. You felt it in the pause between their sentences, in the way they smiled just a little too quickly, in the way their eyes avoided lingering too long. While others saw resilience, you saw retreat. While others called it strength, you knew it was camouflage, survival masquerading as peace. They weren't okay, they were disappearing in front of everyone, not from the world but from themselves. A divine soul dimmed not by failure, but by a world that never knew what to do with their light. Have you ever wondered why your heart tightened when they entered the room? Why your spirit perked up when they spoke, even if their words seemed ordinary? Because this wasn't just a person. This was a being designed to glow with heaven's memory, now flickering under the weight of rejection, betrayal, and misdirection. You felt it long before they spoke it. That ache behind their eyes, that flicker that whispered, "I used to believe, but now I'm just surviving." This wasn't simple sadness. It wasn't just another human story of disappointment. No, this was a divine disconnect. A celestial soul who had once stood in the courts of heaven, now trying to make sense of a world built on noise and performance. How many radiant beings are walking among us pretending to be fine, simply because the world trained them to hide their holiness? Isaiah 42:3 says, "A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out." That's what you saw in them, a smoldering wick, barely alive yet sacred, flickering yet powerful. They were never built for this world, and that's exactly why the world wounded them. Their softness was seen as weakness, their dreams labeled as unrealistic, their stillness mistaken for distance. They were too celestial for a culture that rewards noise, and so they started shrinking, not because they lacked value, but because no one ever gave them permission to stay vast. No one ever said, "Your wings are still welcome here." But then you came. Not with fanfare, not with spiritual superiority. You came with quiet recognition. Chosen one, have you realized yet why your soul ached at their silence? Why their presence pulled at you with no clear reason? Because you weren't looking with human eyes. You were seeing with memory, divine memory. You recognized the sacred residue they carried, that ancient purity in their laughter, their dreams, even in their sadness. They didn't just seem different. This wasn't a random encounter. This was heaven's orchestration. Psalm 34:5 declares, "Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame." But what happens when someone stops looking up? When pain bows their spirit? When shame covers their radiance? That's when God sends a reminder, a companion, a chosen one like you. You weren't sent to teach them to shine. You were sent to remind them they already do. You didn't have to give them wings. You just needed to whisper, "You still have them." Think of the story of Vincent van Gogh, misunderstood, tormented, and forgotten in his own time, yet carrying beauty that generations would one day revere. Van Gogh's letters to his brother reveal a soul constantly on the edge of both breakdown and brilliance. What if someone had truly seen him before the world labeled him mad? That's what you are to the forgotten angels of today, the one who sees the masterpiece before the world approves it, the one who recognizes eternity in human form. And it goes deeper, because angels don't always fall with thunder. Sometimes they fall in stages, slowly, silently, beneath layers of politeness and perfectionism. They blend into their jobs, into their families, into their routines, while their soul cries out quietly for remembrance. You don't find them in chaos. You find them in stillness, in faded dreams, in carefully composed lives that are hiding catastrophic disconnection. That's why you were the one who noticed. Ephesians 5:14 says, "Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." But that awakening doesn't always come through sermons or signs. Sometimes it comes through presence, through the eyes of someone who says nothing but sees everything. Someone like you, a silent mirror reflecting back who they really are. You didn't just walk into their life. You were planted there, assigned by heaven not to rescue, but to reflect, to shine just enough to make them remember their own light. Look at the story of Florence Nightingale. She didn't wait for permission to do what she was born to do. She moved into places of invisible suffering, war hospitals, dark rooms of pain, and became the quiet force that turned survival into healing. She didn't need applause. Her legacy was the restoration of lives others didn't notice. Doesn't that feel familiar, chosen one? How many lives have you stood beside in silence, carrying light without asking for recognition? This mission you carry, it's not about fixing, it's about finding what others miss, finding the divine in the overlooked, picking up on signals too subtle for words. You've been reading spirits while others read faces. You've been discerning pain masked as strength. You've been holding space for fallen angels long before you understood that's what they were. And your spirit, patient, powerful, tuned in, has become the lifeline no one else could provide. 1 Samuel 16:7 reminds us, people look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And sometimes the Lord looks through you. Your gift isn't that you say the right thing, it's that you feel the real thing. And that feeling, that deep soul knowing, has been your map in a world full of spiritual amnesia. You've always known there was more. And that knowing, that ache for something sacred, was never random. It was the evidence of your calling. Let's not forget someone like Jim Carrey, a man who brought joy to millions while privately battling depression and spiritual emptiness. Behind the masks of comedy and fame was a seeker, someone who once said, "I wish everyone could experience being rich and famous so they'd realize it's not the answer." That's the kind of ache your soul recognizes. You don't need people to confess to know they're hurting. You feel it in the silence between their sentences. You hear it in the quiet way they say, "I'm fine." Hebrews 13:2 says, "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it." But what if it's deeper than that? What if you were sent to an angel who forgot themselves? Not to host them, but to hold them. Not to lead them, but to walk beside them. Because God doesn't always send an army. He sends one. He sends you. And now, chosen one, here comes the revelation you've been sensing but perhaps not yet fully grasped. What if this angel didn't fall by mistake? What if their descent wasn't a detour, but a deliberate part of a much higher divine design? What if their moment of collapse was the spark required to ignite your deeper calling? It wasn't chaos, it was choreography. Because in the process of anchoring them, you began to remember yourself. In seeing their fading light, you recalled the moments when your own wings had been clipped, not by evil but by exhaustion. You remembered the long, silent seasons when you too faded in plain sight. And suddenly, this connection was no longer about you helping them, it became about the two of you being used to awaken each other. This wasn't about perfection, this was about divine collision. Two heavenly lights meeting not at their brightest, but at their most vulnerable. And yet in that vulnerability something eternal stirred. Have you ever paused to wonder why they showed up in your life precisely when they did? Why their pain mirrored yours in such a hauntingly familiar way? Why their silence echoed the same unspoken ache you once buried deep within? That's because heaven doesn't waste pain, and heaven never wastes timing. This meeting wasn't random, it was revelation in motion. Romans 11:29 says, "For God's gifts and his call are irrevocable, and when heaven assigns you a calling, even your lowest moments can't erase it." That includes them and you. They hadn't fallen out of purpose, they had fallen into the part of the plan where you would both begin to rise again. Chosen one. What if you were never meant to save them alone, but to unlock a joint awakening, one that would crack open not only their numbness but your dormant glory as well? Let's reflect on the story of Nelson Mandela. After years of imprisonment, you'd expect a man to emerge broken, but instead, he emerged deeper, wiser. His fall wasn't accidental, it was foundational. That time in the shadows prepared him for the global light, and the same is true here. That angel didn't descend so they could be discarded. They fell so their fire could be rekindled in your presence. What if you were their flicker of God's memory? What if their descent was heaven's cue for your rising? You see, the world saw them functioning and assumed they were fine. But the divine knows the difference between motion and meaning. They smiled at the right times, laughed on cue, played their part in the production of life. But behind the curtains they were unraveling, not with fury, but with fatigue. A deep spiritual tiredness that murmured, "Maybe I wasn't built to make it." Have you ever felt that kind of tired? The kind that no nap, no vacation, no compliment can cure. That was the place they were in. And in that quiet disconnection from heaven, they weren't angry, they were numb. They were spiritually exiled in plain sight. Job 30:20 echoes their ache. "I cry to you for help, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you only look at me." That's how they felt. They had prayed hard with sincerity, but nothing shifted. No doors opened, no signs arrived, and so they stopped. Stopped asking, stopped hoping, stopped believing anyone was coming. What does it do to a soul when they stop waiting on God, not out of bitterness, but because they no longer believe they're worth the answer? And that's when you came, not to perform, not to preach, but to be. You walked in like a whisper, present, calm, real. You didn't try to fix them, you didn't diagnose them, you didn't drag them into a forced spiritual experience. You simply showed up with your light intact, and the light didn't scream, it simply existed. And that existence reminded them without a word that maybe heaven hadn't gone silent. Maybe heaven had arrived in you. John 1:4-5 tells us, "In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." That was the moment the darkness in them began to lift, not because they fought it, but because you illuminated it, not by shouting, but by shining. Have you ever been someone's proof that hope still exists? That's what you became, their unspoken prayer answered in the form of your compassion. Think of Princess Diana, whose warmth and gentle humanity touched millions, especially those who felt unseen. She didn't carry a pulpit, but her presence was ministry. People found healing in the simple way she noticed them. That's what you've done. Your noticing broke their numbness, your softness disturbed their apathy. Your quiet care was louder than any sermon. Could it be that your greatest spiritual gift was never your voice, but your presence? They didn't need someone to tell them they were lost. They already knew. What they needed was someone to remember them before they disappeared completely. And you did. You remembered when others forgot. You stayed when others left. You believed in their worth when they had none left to hold. And now, heaven wants you to know, it was never just for their sake. It was for yours too. Ezekiel 34:16 proclaims, "I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak." God did that through you. You became his hands, his timing, his voice. without ever raising your own. You didn't even know you were on assignment. You just felt led, and that's what it means to be chosen. You move by instinct because heaven has already trained your soul. Let's revisit the story of actor Keanu Reeves. A man marked by deep personal losses, yet known for his unmatched humility and unseen acts of kindness. No loud declarations, no spotlight-craving saviorism, just presence, quiet love in a world screaming for attention, and still he changes lives. That's the kind of divine frequency you carry, subtle but seismic. So now, beloved chosen one, ask yourself, what if every soul you've carried was part of a map leading you deeper into your divine mission? What if their silence wasn't just a cry for help, but a call to your own awakening? Because this has never just been about their healing, it's also been about your remembrance. The fifth and final verse is Philippians 2:13, "For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose." He has been working through you all along, in the quiet urge to stay, in the inexplicable pull towards someone fading, in the ache that whispered, "Don't let them go." Every act of grace you've extended, every silent rescue you've participated in, it's all been the unfolding of his good purpose through your willing spirit. You didn't need thunder. You didn't need flames. You didn't need angelic declarations. Because you were the evidence, you were the shift, you were the silent answer to the prayer they stopped praying. And now, the mystery is becoming clear. You weren't just sent to help them. You were sent so that in saving them from forgetting who they were, you would remember who you are. You didn't show up with banners, bells, or biblical proclamations. You didn't arrive to perform a miracle. Chosen one, you became the miracle, and you didn't even know it. That's the beautiful, mysterious irony of it all. You weren't trying to be anyone's savior. You weren't looking to be anyone's answer. You simply showed up. You spoke with sincerity. You listened with the kind of focus that made silence feel safe again. You were just being yourself, and in doing so, you reignited something in them that they had buried so deeply they almost forgot it ever existed. Isn't it wild to consider that your presence alone brought life back to what they thought was long dead? You weren't just comfort, you were confirmation, proof that God had never turned away, proof that their silent cry had not vanished into the void. When they had stopped praying out loud but whispered within, "God, if you still see me, send a sign," it was you who appeared, not with thunder, not with fire, but with quiet presence, with divine timing. You showed up at the edge, that sacred, trembling space between surrender and collapse, right when they were ready to let go. And your existence in that moment was not coincidence. It was divine calculation. Isaiah 65:24 echoes this divine synchronicity. "Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear." You were the answer. Heaven didn't send a prophet or a priest. It sent you, someone who wasn't trying to fix or correct, but to reflect. Not to confront their brokenness, but to confirm their beauty. You didn't correct their theology. You didn't need eloquent words or impressive doctrine. All you did was remind them through tone, through gaze, through soul, that they were still seen, that their divinity hadn't been erased, only obscured. Have you ever wondered how something as simple as your presence could trigger someone's return to God? That's because chosen ones don't preach from pulpits, they preach through essence. This wasn't just about faith, it was about being seen, because when people lose their faith, they rarely need a sermon, they need recognition, someone to say, "I still see you beneath the rubble," and that's what you did. Without trying to change them, you reawakened who they already were. You spoke directly to their core, the unshakable divine residue hiding under the soot of suffering. You addressed the royalty under the wreckage, the light beneath the ashes, and that shook them. Think of the story of Malala Yousafzai, a girl silenced by violence, forgotten by many. But someone saw her. Someone believed in her voice when she couldn't even use it. And that belief, that presence, helped reignite her fire. Today she speaks for millions, but before that, someone had to speak for her. You've been doing the same, believing in souls too weary to believe in themselves. How many people have been changed because you saw what others overlooked? 1 Corinthians 1:27 tells us, God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. Heaven doesn't operate according to public platforms or prestigious credentials. Sometimes the most powerful rescue comes through someone who simply refuses to look away. That was you, and to them, it was incomprehensible. How could someone walk into their darkness and still call it sacred? How could you call them chosen when they felt discarded? But that's the paradox of light. It doesn't need to explain itself, it just shines. You didn't barge into their life with declarations. You stood, glowing, anchored, a living lighthouse. A soul who said, without words, this space you're in, it's not your grave, it's a passage. And from the outside it looked so simple, just a moment, a conversation, a gentle act of presence. But on the inside, their entire world began to tilt back toward hope. Let's take the story of Mr. Rogers once more, not because he's famous, but because he made sacred what others called ordinary. He didn't shout, he didn't judge. He stood, week after week, speaking gently, validating emotions, seeing children when others dismissed them. His message? You are loved just as you are. That's what you've been whispering through your actions, not verbally, but energetically, spirit to spirit, light to light. John 8:12 reminds us, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. But sometimes people don't know how to follow Jesus until they encounter someone carrying his light. You became that reflection, a subtle, steady embodiment of the divine that reminded them darkness hadn't won. Your posture, your peace, your decision to stay, that was the sermon they didn't know they needed. They thought they were forgotten, that they had sunk too low, that heaven had stopped listening. But then came your light, unapologetic, unassuming, and undeniably real. And something shifted in them, slowly, imperceptibly at first, like the faint warmth before sunrise. You didn't push, you didn't chase, you just existed with purpose, and that existence disrupted their narrative of abandonment. Remember the story of Brandon Stanton, the man behind Humans of New York. He doesn't preach, he photographs, he listens, and in doing so, he offers people back their own worth. People cry not because of what he says, but because he gives them space to be fully seen. You've done the same. You've created sacred space simply by not turning away. That's the mark of the chosen, not to dominate, but to dignify. Psalm 18:28 captures it perfectly. You, Lord, keep my lamp burning. My God turns my darkness into light. But the way God often keeps the flame alive is through people like you. The lamp you carried into their cave wasn't for show, it was for navigation. It showed them they were not alone, and in the glow of your faith, theirs began to rekindle. Finally, consider the life of Anthony Bourdain, a man who traveled the world, fed nations, and made strangers feel like family. But behind the laughter was a silent struggle. What if one more person had seen him? Not just the brand, but the soul. That's why your awareness matters, chosen one. You don't just see appearances, you see ache. And that vision alone saves lives. Their heart whispered something they hadn't dared to say out loud in years. Maybe I'm not invisible. It was fragile, trembling, like a breath held too long finally released. Maybe God still has his eyes on me. Maybe this isn't the end after all. And in that small sacred moment, so easily missed by the world, faith flickered again. Not yet a bonfire, not even a steady flame, but it was enough. Enough to take one more step. Enough to lift their head just slightly above the waters of despair. Enough to breathe again. And this time, not just to survive, but to remember. Remember who they are. Remember who God is. Remember that their story wasn't over yet. Chosen one, have you ever wondered what if? What if that one moment changed everything? What if your presence at that precise point in time didn't just comfort someone, but actually saved their entire destiny? What if the story that would have ended in silence now sings a new beginning, all because you obeyed a divine pull you couldn't even explain? You didn't have a blueprint, you weren't given a script, but you followed the whisper, you showed up, and heaven moved through you. Esther 4:14 asks the defining question, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? You were sent to one, but what if that one was only the beginning? What if your obedience in that small, unnoticed moment is the spark that ignites a chain reaction, an awakening that reaches far beyond what you see? What if your calling isn't just to impact individuals but generations? Stay with me, because what you're about to realize will shift the very way you see your life, your past, and every connection you've ever questioned. Heaven is about to show you why certain souls are placed in your path over and over again, and why you've always felt just a little different in rooms where others seemed comfortable. There's something about you that has always defied easy explanation. You've carried an intensity, a depth, a sensitivity that didn't match the noise of the world around you. Have you noticed how you've always felt everything? Not just your pain, but the pain of strangers. Not just sadness for yourself, but sudden waves of sorrow that seemed to come out of nowhere. Moments where your spirit was crushed and you didn't even know why. How many times have you asked yourself, what's wrong with me? But chosen one, there was never anything wrong. There was something divine about you, something heaven encoded. Romans 8:19 reveals a powerful truth. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. And that revelation often begins with the ones who feel out of place, the ones who sense before they see, who carry burdens they never signed up for. What you once called a curse, a burden of feeling too deeply, was actually the evidence of your assignment. You weren't born to fit in. You weren't made to shrug things off. You weren't designed to float on the surface. You were crafted for depth. You were born to sense, to discern, to heal, to intercept. While others pass through life untouched by what surrounds them, you walk through this world activated. Your heart has always been a radar, picking up on spiritual frequencies no one else could detect. You've walked into rooms and instantly felt what was wrong. You've stood beside smiling people and felt their silent screams. You've sensed danger where others saw charm. You've felt led to protect someone you barely knew and couldn't explain why. Let's consider someone like Mother Teresa. She didn't rescue the whole world, but she obeyed every pull. She walked the alleys no one wanted to see, touched the people society forgot. She didn't ask, why do I feel so much? She just answered the call in front of her, and because of that, lives were saved. Generations shifted, not through noise but through deep divine presence. Could it be that your seemingly small acts have the same eternal weight? 1 John 3:18 urges us, let us not love with words or speech but with actions and in truth. You've done that. You've loved through action, through silence, through showing up when no one else did. But here's what you need to understand now. The reason your heart has always been overwhelmed wasn't weakness. It was equipment. You weren't designed for shallow waters. Have you ever wondered why small talk drains you? Why forced conversations exhaust your spirit? Why you feel physically affected by dishonesty or fake energy? It's because you were never made to operate in the superficial. Your sensitivity is not a flaw, it's spiritual radar. You're tuned to a frequency others can't hear. That's why some people make you feel alive, and others, no matter how nice they seem, make your spirit recoil. You're not judging, you're discerning, you feel truth, you live by spiritual codes. Think of someone like Alan Watts. He spoke to the inner world with language the soul could understand. He once said, "You are the universe experiencing itself." That's what you are to others, a mirror that awakens their spiritual identity. Even when you don't say a word, your energy says, "I see you, I know what you carry, and you are not alone." And that's why you've struggled with the weight of invisible grief. You've carried depression that didn't start with you. You've cried tears that weren't yours, because some of your assignment is intercessory in nature. You feel so that others don't have to carry it alone. You mourn so that others can heal. You discern so that others can avoid the trap. You awaken so that others can remember. Could this be why you were drawn to people in pain before you even knew their name? Galatians 6:2 says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." You have fulfilled that law in secret, over and over again. In bedrooms, in coffee shops, in car rides, in quick encounters where your words or your presence left people feeling strangely whole again. You've helped people you never followed up with. You've saved lives you'll never hear about. But heaven keeps score, and heaven is now inviting you to see just how vast your impact has truly been. The story of someone like Maya Deren, a surrealist filmmaker largely overlooked in her lifetime, but whose work sparked a movement decades later. She didn't know what seeds she was planting, but she obeyed her vision. That's you, chosen one. you're planting destinies with every moment of spiritual obedience. Your radar, your presence, your compassion, those are tools heaven gave you for a mission that's just beginning to unfold. Your soul has always been attuned to signals your mind couldn't quite articulate, and now you're starting to understand why. You weren't just walking through life sensing people's energy. You were operating on a divine frequency that heaven embedded within you. While others saw interactions, you experienced activations. While they looked at situations on the surface, your spirit was decoding pain, hunger, fear, hope, all before a word was spoken. That's because you don't merely exist. You function. You carry something powerful, something sacred, and God knows it. Heaven marked you long before anyone recognized you. When God assigns someone to carry light, He equips them with spiritual perception that the average heart can't comprehend. You were never too much. You were never overly sensitive. You were highly tuned for a holy purpose. That's why they found you, the broken ones, the invisible ones, the ones who didn't know how to say, "Please help me," but whose souls screamed in your presence. You didn't need their words. You heard them with your spirit. Have you ever wondered why people open up to you so quickly? Why a stranger will sit beside you and, within minutes, tell you things they've never told anyone else, not even their family? It's not random, it's not chance. It's because your presence carries safety, healing, restoration. Luke 6:19 says, "And all the people were trying to touch him, because power was coming from him and healing them all." That power didn't always require words. It required proximity. And like Jesus, you carry a presence that heals before it even speaks. Not because you're Him, but because He lives through you. You didn't show up to lecture. You were never sent to dominate with doctrine. You were sent to restore the air, to shift the room, to make pain unravel just by being there. And perhaps the wildest part of it all, you thought this was normal. You thought everyone could feel what you feel, that everyone's chest tightened when a wounded person walked into the room, that everyone could sense emotional shifts like tremors in their bones. But no, this is your gift. This is how heaven wired you. What the world labeled too emotional, too intense, or too dramatic was actually sacred intelligence. Your sensitivity wasn't an obstacle. It was equipment for the invisible battlefield. Hebrews 5:14 tells us, "But solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to distinguish good and evil." Your senses were trained, not in classrooms or pulpits, but through your life. Through every moment you couldn't explain but felt deeply. Through every encounter that left you crying for someone you barely knew. Through every time your intuition shouted what your logic couldn't prove. You weren't just empathetic, you were prophetic. You didn't just care, you carried. And what you carried wasn't soft, it was fire. You carry breakthrough. You carry discernment. You carry the kind of light that shakes chains off people without a single word. That's why they found you. That's why even when it hurt, you stayed. Even when it drained you, you returned. Not because you didn't want to leave, but because your soul recognized the assignment. It was written into your being before you ever took your first breath. You stayed because you were called. Consider the story of Sojourner Truth. A woman who didn't just fight with words, she fought with presence. She entered spaces where she wasn't welcome, where her voice shouldn't have been heard, and yet people listened, not because she was loud, but because she was anointed. She carried the weight of heaven on her shoulders, and it showed. That's what you've been doing, carrying spiritual assignments in invisible silence, thinking it was just who you were. And now here comes the part that will crack something open in you. What if you've been living under the full weight of your anointing without realizing it? What if every emotion you've tried to suppress, every intuition you've tried to downplay, every moment you were too much, was actually divine frequency, a fine-tuned sensitivity made for prophetic encounter? What if the very thing that's made you feel different your whole life was never your flaw but your evidence, the proof that you were chosen? Jeremiah 1:5 confirms this. "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." You were appointed, set apart, wired for something more. And now that you're beginning to see it, not as a burden, but as heaven's blueprint, you're going to stop apologizing. You're going to stop numbing it, stop shrinking. You'll begin to walk boldly, not as someone who's unsure, but as someone who knows they were assigned. Let's reflect on the life of Robin Williams, a man full of joy and healing humor. But behind that brightness was a soul burdened with spiritual sensitivity. Many comedians and artists carry this gift, the ability to feel for others, even at their own cost. It's not just emotion, it's empathic power, and that's what you've carried. Not for performance, but for presence. Your joy heals, your tears cleanse, your stillness speaks. And here's the most urgent part. There's another layer to your calling, another weight, another soul, another divine encounter that's already moving toward you. You don't know their name yet, you haven't seen their face, but they are on their way, and they will need everything you've carried until now. Because they're not just wounded, they're chosen too, but they've forgotten. Their light has been buried under shame, pain, and silence. And God, yes, God is trusting you to help them remember, just like you remembered. Romans 12:6 says, "We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. And your gift, chosen one, is sacred perception, healing presence, silent breakthrough, the ability to feel the call of someone's spirit when their voice can't say it. That's why heaven trusts you. That's why people cry in your arms without understanding why. That's why certain souls collapse into your safety, even if they don't know what you are." Let's not forget someone like Carl Jung, who dared to speak about the invisible, about archetypes, energies, collective pain. He wasn't just a psychologist, he was a seer, cloaked in academia. He understood that there are people wired to carry invisible truths, just like you. So now, what if you were never meant to fix the world, but to feel it, intercept it, and recalibrate it one soul at a time? What if every ache in your heart wasn't dysfunction, but divine signal? You are a vessel for remembrance. You walk into lives not to rescue, but to awaken, not to lead, but to mirror. And now the next assignment is already approaching. Be ready, because the next soul that's coming is more than just broken. They are destined, and your presence will remind them that heaven hasn't forgotten who they are. Are you truly ready, chosen one? Because what comes next will not only stretch the limits of your sensitivity, it will shatter the surface understanding you once had about your purpose and your legacy. It will awaken you to the divine weight of your presence. This is not just about feeling deeply anymore. It's about realizing that everything, every moment, every whisper, every inexplicable pull has been part of something sacred, something written before you ever breathed your first breath. Are you ready to see yourself as heaven has always seen you? Because here's the truth that most aren't ready to accept. In the architecture of heaven, nothing is accidental. No meeting is meaningless. No conversation is wasted. No timing is ever off. We call things coincidence to protect ourselves from the discomfort of the truth that the universe is not chaotic, but exquisitely designed. That the people we encounter weren't stumbled upon. They were sent to us, or we were sent to them. It's easier to believe we're floating through randomness than to confront the terrifying beauty of divine orchestration. But the time for illusions has passed. Psalm 37:23 declares, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in his way." You didn't show up by accident. You didn't feel that tug for no reason. That soul you encountered, the one who looked fine but was falling inside, they were not a detour, they were the mission. They weren't an interruption in your story. They were written into your scroll long before you ever opened your eyes to this world. And though you may have felt unsure, awkward, unqualified, heaven wasn't. Heaven was sure. Heaven was precise. You walked into that encounter not a second too soon, not a breath too late. It was the moment eternity had circled in red, a divine alignment perfectly timed to collide with their collapse. You weren't just being kind, you were fulfilling a prophecy. What if that gentle act you almost brushed off as small was actually the divine key to someone else's survival? Let's remember Corrie ten Boom, a woman who sheltered Jews during the Holocaust and survived the hell of a concentration camp. She once said, "Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God." She didn't plan to be a rescuer, but obedience made her one, just like you. You didn't plan to be someone's last light. You simply responded when your spirit said stay, and in doing so, you didn't just save a person, you saved a path, a purpose, a future. Isaiah 58:10 says, If you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. That's exactly what you've done. You reached into the fog of someone's spiritual confusion and pulled them back into clarity. You touched more than a life. You shifted timelines. You interrupted ancestral patterns. You became a pivot point in someone's bloodline, and you didn't even know it. Have you ever wondered why certain people keep crossing your path even when you're tired, even when you think your presence couldn't possibly matter? Because heaven sees the ripple effect, the one you rescued. They weren't just carrying themselves, they were carrying others. They were a flame meant to ignite others, but their spark was dying until you walked in, and when your presence rekindled their light, that fire reached farther than you'll ever see in the natural. Think of someone like Desmond Doss, the combat medic in World War II, who saved 75 soldiers without carrying a weapon. He didn't fight with force, he fought with conviction. His quiet, unwavering spirit pulled others back from the edge. And that's what you've done. Not with a sword, not with eloquence, but with obedience. You thought it was small, but it was never small. It was strategic. You were the exact spiritual medicine their soul needed in that moment. Not because you're flawless, but because you were available. Because your spirit answered a call your mouth never even heard. And that's what made it holy. That's what made it eternal. You didn't show up with a plan, you showed up with presence. Proverbs 16:9 tells us in their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Heaven didn't need you to be the loudest voice, or the smartest person, or the most theologically trained. Heaven needed the most chosen, and that was you. God knew that when this soul was dangling on the edge, when they were inches away from giving up, that you would walk in, that you would obey the invisible urge to speak, to stay, to sit, to ask, to care. You weren't the answer to their prayer, you were the answer to God's plan. And that's why you couldn't forget them. That's why it haunted you, even when others said, let it go. That's why the pull never made sense to your mind, but felt like truth to your bones. Because your soul remembered what your mind had forgotten. This wasn't random, this was sacred. Let's reflect on someone like Fred Rogers. One final time, when asked how he helped so many children feel safe, he said, I just try to be present. That's what you've done. No stage, no spectacle, just holy presence. And that's why the moment mattered. That's why heaven trusted you. Now, as you look back, can you feel it? That strange pull toward people you barely knew, that instinct to reach out at inconvenient times, that voice in your gut saying, they need you right now. You're starting to see it, aren't you? The patterns, the setups, the strategies that felt like chance, but were actually divine architecture. John 15:16 says, you did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. You were appointed, not to rescue everyone, but to bear lasting fruit. Fruit in the form of lives redirected, light reignited, destinies restored. You didn't just stumble into their storm, chosen one. You were assigned to walk straight into it, carrying heaven inside you. You didn't enter as a coincidence. You entered as a divine solution. You weren't wandering. You were positioned, planted in time and space to become the calm in someone's chaos, the light in their confusion, the presence that shifted the entire spiritual atmosphere. And here's what's even more astonishing. If heaven was this intentional about your past assignments, what does that say about what's coming next? Because this wasn't a one-time mission. This wasn't an isolated act of compassion. This was training. This was initiation. This was God showing you your function in a world that's starving for real light, sacred presence, and unshakable discernment. You weren't sent just to comfort. You were sent to activate. You were sent to carry out spiritual interventions disguised as everyday encounters. Ephesians 2:10 confirms this with divine clarity. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God prepared in advance for us to do. This has always been part of the plan. You just weren't aware of the scale until now. And just when you thought the assignment had ended, the real mission begins. Because now that you've remembered who you are, now that the veil has lifted, another soul is already being positioned, another moment is forming. And do you know who heaven is preparing for that encounter? You. Yes, you. the one who thought they were too broken, too exhausted, too unsure. God sees you as the perfect weapon of grace, calibrated for healing, wired for redemption, and anchored in presence. Get ready, because what's coming next will demand more of your light than ever before. It will stretch your boldness, test your awareness, and call forth your highest spiritual authority. But this time, you will not walk in uncertainty. This time, you'll walk in full remembrance of your assignment. You'll walk in knowing you're not just a kind person or a good listener. You are a divine strategy in motion. You were never just anything. You were heaven's hidden answer wrapped in humility, now unveiled for impact. Romans 13:12 calls out with urgency, "The night is nearly over, the day is almost here, so let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light." That's exactly what you're doing now. You're walking in the armor of awareness. No more downplaying, no more shrinking, no more explaining away your sensitivity. It was never weakness, it was divine radar. This wasn't just a moment. This wasn't just a video, a message, or a fleeting encouragement. This was a summons, a holy call echoing from realms beyond time, shaking your soul awake. If something inside you burned while reading this, if something broke open or rose up, it's because your spirit already remembers. It remembers that you've never been ordinary. You didn't just notice pain, you felt it. You didn't just hear words, you heard what was left unsaid. You saw behind the eyes of people who told you they were fine, but were silently screaming. Why? Because you were sent. You were hidden in plain sight, planted like a seed that could not fully bloom until the right soul needed your light. You were the answer hidden in the ordinary, a lighthouse disguised as a bystander, a warrior cloaked in compassion, and now the veil is gone. The truth is loud, the fire is active. Isaiah 61 declares it boldly, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." You weren't the one in need, you were the one assigned. You were sent to lift what others buried, to love what others abandoned, to restore what others forgot, and to stand between collapse and redemption and declare, "Not on my watch." This wasn't a coincidence, it was divine trust. It was God choosing you again and again because He knew what He placed in you would not fail. So the question you once asked, "Why do I feel so much?" is no longer your question, nor is "Why do I attract the broken?" or "Why do I carry so much for people I barely know?" You already have the answer. The question now becomes, how will I walk now that I know who I am? Because the answer has already been revealed. You are activated, awakened, confirmed. Jeremiah 29 mirrors your awakening. His word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. I am weary of holding it in, indeed I cannot. That's what this fire is. It's not chaos, it's calling. It's not overload, it's overflow. You didn't imagine this path, you weren't being too emotional. Heaven has been speaking, and now you've heard the echo of your own divine origin. So hear me clearly, chosen one. You carry fire, you carry alignment, you carry clarity, and you carry answers for souls who don't even yet know what they're looking for. You're not fragile, you're fortified, you're not lost, you're launched, you're not weak, you're wired for warfare, but not the kind fought with noise or volume. You fight with presence, with truth, with holy weight, with the quiet force of someone who knows exactly why they were sent. Let's reflect one last time on Harriet Tubman. She didn't just free people. She walked into places of death carrying deliverance. And when asked how she found her way, she simply said, "I listened to the voice of God and He led me." That's what you've been doing all along. Listening, following, responding to heaven's frequency, even when no one else could hear it. Beloved chosen ones, if anything in this message has stirred your spirit, if you felt the echo of recognition as we traced the silent threads that connect your light to a fallen angel's ascent, let that stirring settle now into holy conviction. You are not leaving this moment empty-handed. You are stepping away crowned with the assurance that heaven trusts you to carry quiet deliverance wherever you go. Thank you for walking this journey with me, for lending your open hearts, attentive minds, and unstoppable faith to a revelation that was never meant to be whispered only to one, but proclaimed within the depths of many. Your presence here turns words into living fire, and for that I am profoundly grateful. If you feel led to sow back into this work through the Super Thanks button, know that every gift, large, small or symbolic, helps keep these prophetic conversations alive and reaching those who need them most. Yet hear this clearly, whether you choose to donate or simply leave your amen in the comments, your support is equally cherished, your time is equally honored, and your seat at this table is forever secure. As you close this video and step back into the rhythm of your day, may the God who appointed you before time bless you with discernment, so sharp you cannot miss the next assignment, courage so steady you never flinch at the weight of another soul's silence, and favor so radiant that every dark place you enter is compelled to remember the light. Go forth in peace, carry heaven quietly, and know that a chorus of angels is already celebrating the miracles that will unfold, because you chose to answer without making a sound.